This has been an iterative process for the city. We began it about 3 years ago. So over time, we've put out a series of drafts. And so today, what we will discuss is the final draft that will be and has been presented to the Planning Commission. There are some notable features within this draft. So we will focus our conversation on the draft that's currently circulating and posted for the community to provide us feedback on. Next slide. So would like to take a few minutes to walk you through how we got to this point, what you will see in terms of development parameters and regulations. From the very beginning, it was the mayor's intent that we offered a streamlined process, but also working to support and enhance our neighborhood and communities from a quality of life perspective. So this document comes with a tremendous amount of feedback that our objective is to hopefully bring those two areas together. Next slide. So as was highlighted in the presentation, we refer to our new code as the Unified Development Code. As was also mentioned, the previous or current code that we're operating from was initially developed in the 1960s. And so over time, as development priorities, development procedures and trends have changed, we've had a series of amendments to that code. But if you've ever dealt with it or utilized it as an end user, not having a complete overhaul where all of the pieces and parts connect can create conflict. So our goal was to offer a more modernized approach to land use regulation with a primary goal of enhancing our community. So while the code offers rules, standards, and procedures to guide development or redevelopment in Mobile, our goal is to present a document that remains economically competitive, creates great places for our residents, and again, strengthens our neighborhoods. Next slide.
Shayla, can I interrupt for just 1 second? I'm so sorry. Can everybody see the slides? I just got an email that one person could not.
I can.
Yeah, I can see them fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Shayla.
Sure. The Unified Development Code is essentially a hybrid code, but it integrates what we refer to as a form-based code. For those of you that are familiar with our downtown development district, it is a form-based code where it not only deals with land use and zoning with respect to the mix of uses, but it also integrates requirements regarding the built environment. This is a trend that we're seeing all across the country where communities have embraced this notion of form with the goal of creating developments that embrace the unique fabric of that particular community. And so the return on this investment based on the research, and this is an article from the the National Realtors Association, which talks about the value of form-based codes, essentially says that when you approach your development process from a more holistic way, then over time it can increase investment, the interest and value from an economic development standpoint within your community. So at the end of the day, as we have gone throughout the community to ensure that we're hearing all of the voices that touched this process, whether it be from citizens, neighborhood groups, homeowners associations, all the way to the development community, realtors, contractors, the engineering design professional group. They're balancing interests at work. So our goal is to figure out, how we integrate those voices within this coding process as a way to offer support and sustainability for our neighborhood communities, but also, as I stated before, working to streamline the process so that there's predictability. So if you're interested in building and investing in our community, there's a clear-cut process that you can walk through to avoid any issues or conflicts. We've received a great deal of support through this process. It was very important to us that our stakeholders, a diverse range of stakeholders, whether in the economic development, tourism, small business, community health, development community, that their objectives within this process would be recognized. So we are hopeful that organizations like PEP and others are sign on ultimately in support of our work. And this is just an illustration of the many, many partners that we've been working with, but have endorsed our efforts up until this point. So how we arrived at the final draft. Again, this has been a multi-year process. When Mayor Stimson came in office in 2013, one of the things that he arrived at is that the city needed a comprehensive plan for growth. And thus the map for Mobile was adopted in 2015. The next step for us was to focus on our future land use and major street plan as a second element of this body of work. So these two plans were ultimately presented to our Planning Commission and endorsed, and they set the stage in order for us to move forward.
But I got to sit here long enough to know what's going on.
Mike, Jean, I think you are not on mute. Can you mute yourself, please?
So the next step in this process, it was important for us to, rather than sit in work in closed offices with planners, developing this code, it was important to us that we developed a draft so that the community could respond to. So in October of 2017, we presented our first draft. Every step along the way, we've been very communicative and transparent in our process. So we've given the public an opportunity to weigh in at every step. So you can see from this slide that there have been 3 iterations. I'm proud to say that we have, as compared to our existing zoning ordinance, we've really pared down the language, the number of pages within that document. But as we've heard from the community and the public, where we can, we've tried to respond to the change, or at least provide an educational or informative response in terms of why the draft moves in one direction versus another. Next slide. So the next steps in this process, as I stated before, we've presented a draft, the final draft, to the Mobile Planning Commission last month. The process requires that the Planning Commission be formally presented with the plan. They are required by state law to enter into a public hearing process where the public is given X amount of days to review and comment. Once we receive a vote of approval from the Planning Commission, because this is an ordinance that has to be adopted, it's required that we move toward the City Council to follow their public hearing requirements as well. So once we receive a vote of approval from the Planning Commission, we will then present this final draft to the City Council for review and adoption. And we expect that we will, in the next month, start that formal process with the Planning Commission. And once that wraps up, we'll move on to the City Council and we'll work with them to understand what next steps they would like to see integrated into the process. So from this last draft, from draft 3 up until this point, we've heard from a number of groups, but collectively we've conducted over 200 small group meetings since this process began. Within the last draft, we probably received draft 3 a little over 600 comments, ranging from interests and that stem from questions regarding one zoning classification from another, all the way to something of interest to a particular private property owner and how this ordinance impacts them. So again, transparency has been very, very important and a priority along the way, and I think we've made every effort to reach out to as many groups as possible. Next slide. So the public hearing will be coming up in February. The Map for Mobile Draft 3 contents, UDC contents can be found at the mapformobile.org website. All of the various articles, information about the process and how you can provide feedback is all identified within our website. As we move toward the public hearing process, we're asking that all of those that are interested in speaking and submitting comment do so by Friday, February 19th at noon. Due to some of the special circumstances that COVID presents, all of our meetings are held virtually. And we are making every effort at this stage to get the code into all of our City of Mobile libraries so that folks can have an opportunity to come and weigh in. Next slide. So what you'll see in the final draft, we'll walk you through those elements. So this is essentially the structure of the document. It covers all of the various zoning designations. It speaks to specific development standards. It covers the types of uses within those zoning districts. Obviously, you see all of the legalese, procedures, enforcement, legal provisions, and then essentially the submittal requirements, what a property owner or developer or design professional is required to do to walk through our process. We'll talk about these a little bit later, but we have actually 4 overlay districts. Those are for the Africatown Peninsula and the Village of Spring Hill communities, and we've also integrated our historic district guidelines into this process, but those are special overlays that have special requirements that are unique to those specific geographical areas. The last is an appendix. The Downtown Development District obviously is already in place, and so the Unified Development Code integrates the DDD requirements into this body of work. So for those of you that have been tracking along with our process from the very beginning, we have chosen to retain the existing zoning designations. So as an example, your R1, your R2, your R3 are all residential zoning designations. Obviously, you have your more commercial designations. And so we have retained those districts within the new UDC. So there is no change in designation, no new terminology. We've just felt that for ease of the user, it was a little bit more digestible to carry forward those district names and how they are currently zoned and applied to avoid any confusion, and then obviously to improve consistency between the other adopted plans. We have retained 4 designations that were previously outlined in an earlier iteration. The commercial warehouse and the maritime categories, mixed, light, and heavy, have been retained in the new draft, those districts have not been mapped. But for individuals or companies or businesses that are interested in zoning to those categories, they are available. Given our changing economic landscape, distribution being a much sought after land use opportunity, we wanted to make sure that we had a designation that would allow for that in the most appropriate areas. And then also because we are a waterfront community where maritime and the maritime industry is integral to our economy, we have retained those 3 categories as well to hopefully provide for the needed land allocation to support those activities. I would call this a state code legal requirement. Again, because our code is rather dated, there are a number of state code planning legislative requirements that our code has previously did not meet. So if you're familiar with our process, there are a number of uses that may be allowed within their districts but require planning approval. We are moving away from that planning approval process and are now either requiring what we call a conditional use or a special exception. Conditional uses are reserved for the most intense uses. So, those would be the types of uses that have significant impact to a specific area. They will require 2 public hearings, one before the Planning Commission and then to the City Council. The special exception uses also will require a public hearing, and then those would go to our Board of Adjustment. This is just an example of what the use table, as we refer to it, it specifically tells you, gives you an example of a use and tells you where those uses are allowed. And then it stipulates whether a special hearing, whether it's a special exception or a conditional use, or where that use may be allowed by right without a hearing, or may even be restricted depending on the type of use. Our current zoning ordinance recognizes over 600 land use classifications, many of which are outdated and no longer functional within our current economy. So we've taken a lot of time to reorganize those uses, ensure that they are appropriate within their identified zoning classifications, and then of course applied the special exception conditional use process to uses that we've determined to be potentially impactful to a potential area for development. Next slide. As I've stated before, we've integrated our form-based standards. And Margaret, I think we need another click. The first, we've distinguished between where these form-based standards will apply. These are design requirements that are intended to improve the quality of development. They are not as restrictive by any means in terms of what you may see in a historic district, but the goal there was to identify the type of development parameters that would be that would represent Mobile's unique development flavor, and so that you're not, applying development standards that tend to create commercial spaces that just don't have that unique identity. And we're hearing from many of our neighborhood groups and community residents that they appreciate what makes Mobile Mobile, and they wanted that reflected in our development guidelines. I think we've got one more there. While we've identified these additional standards, in our effort to support the development process, we've worked really hard to make sure that that we have many options in place, so that you have a menu to choose from. And I think what's a real benefit to them is that when a development is presented and one of these options is incorporated, it does not require any special public hearings. You receive an automatic administrative approval, and at least from the developer's perspective, that reduces time and cost, knowing that that administrative approval is there, and thus the public hearings, wouldn't be necessary to apply. So we've gotten very positive feedback so far on these standards. So in this last iteration, again, we worked very hard to make sure that they were standards were simplified, easy to understand, and easy to apply. Some zoning districts now have two versions. Obviously, Mobile, east of 65, has that more traditional neighborhood development feel, where you've got streets that are and homes that are located on a grid pattern. It's a much more dense development model. The walkability, the pedestrian access is there. Whereas if you're west of 65, it has a more suburban feel. Larger lots, larger landscapes, bigger homes, it's just, the way that our city has developed over time, we wanted to make sure that we didn't have a one-size-fits-all approach to these development parameters. So these seek to address the differences in development pattern from our traditional neighborhood development style to a more suburban style. So in terms of applying our form-based standards, here is what we refer to as our menu of standards. Each development where they apply would be asked to pick from a menu. And these are the categories: site frontage, height, wall, and architectural features. So to try to simplify and make this as easy as we could, we'd simply ask that the development types select one of these options from each major category. And of course, if they're wanting to do more, we would encourage that. Here are a few examples that already exist in Mobile where these standards would apply and these projects would be permitted and completely fit into the design fabric that we're looking for. So just a little bit more background on the urban and suburban districts. You can see that the orange shaded area is more the urban style. You've got your Midtown, Mobile neighborhoods. You've got some of the area neighborhoods that flow along Michigan Avenue, even to the northern parts of our city, where the development pattern is just more compact. But then obviously the green represents the more suburban style, where we're seeing the larger lots and thus larger lot size, lot coverages, yards, and setbacks. So we're just trying to make sure that we're I think that the biggest win here is the mayor is focused on his 1,000 homes over the next several years. Is if you were to develop within that orange shaded area right now, there are a number of development waivers that you would be required to submit to the city and go through that public hearing process. But within this new draft document, we're removing those barriers. And if you're located in these areas, we're trying to make the path forward in this process so that you're not required to go through all of these hoops and hurdles to redevelop within that core to match what's already there. As previously mentioned, we've got the various overlay districts. All of these overlays will now become mandatory. The Spring Hill, Village of Spring Hill overlay was the first. That was initiated by a community-based organization in Spring Hill. They had an adopted and approved plan that was presented to the city, which was also the case for Africatown and the Peninsula. So those overlays have been integrated into the UDC. They all have a unique design requirements. Spring Hill overlay is more of a form-based code, which is what we're introducing with the UDC, but it has some increased requirements that are very specific to Spring Hill. The Africatown overlay works to really integrate what we refer to as some environmental design techniques or requirements. It also encourages that urban development pattern that we talked about earlier. The Peninsula overlay is really more working to address more environmental low impact development standards. And so many of those options have been integrated into the Peninsula plan to encourage more environmental stewardship. And then, of course, the historic district overlay as an added protection to those existing historic districts. We have already received some interest in understanding how any future overlay districts could be established. We have in place a process for up and coming neighborhoods where they'd have to organize and develop and work in partnership with the city so that a potentially new neighborhood overlay district could be established. We're of the mindset that the UDC now integrates many of the expectations that the community has, but if for some reason there's something unique to that community that they'd like more specified within the code, then this is what this process will allow. Just a little bit more specifics on the neighborhood overlay district for the Peninsula. It incorporates environmental standards such as required conservation site design for residential developments, required compliance with one element of ADEM's low impact development guidelines, pervious parking requirements for all commercial developments exceeding minimum parking standards. We've also integrated, or rather made the decision to focus on tree protection and preservation requirements, but it will be moved to a new chapter of city code. Right now, those requirements are integrated in the zoning ordinance, but based on feedback that we've received in the process, it was really important, and we agreed that the urban forester have direct insight involvement as he or she offers specific expertise surrounding tree protection and preservation. So now having this freestanding code, which but in terms of state law requirements, there needed to be modifications to this code to allow the urban forester his duties and responsibilities to be spelled out with respect to tree protection and tree preservation. A public hearing will be held next month to address this issue, and ultimately this ordinance would be adopted by the City Council. So now I'll turn it over to members of the team to talk a little bit about our natural resource protection guidelines that we have set, which are new features within the UDC. Before staff jumps on to give some additional information on these requirements, the city, these are all new features, and so we've been working very closely with the city's engineers to ensure that we're incorporating the type of natural resource protections that work in concert with Mobile's unique environmental landscape. And so what I'll say is this is a first start for us. The UDC is not the regulator of stormwater drainage, you know, all of the more intense civil engineering requirements that go along with that. But in this case, it works to encourage this type of protection where appropriate. So I'll turn it over to Margaret or Bert to walk us through these next slides.
One of the elements within the code is a conservation subdivision. Conservation subdivisions are for R1 single-family residential developments. And what it is designed to do is to allow the clustering of the development outside of the environmentally sensitive area. You would then have reduced lot sizes and things of that nature, but then the resources such as the waterways, wetlands, and things of that nature are then available in various forms of open space, be it completely undisturbed or containing walking trails and small accessory structures like a gazebo or something of that nature. We have also incorporated into the UDC, and it has been in the document in some form or another since version 1, riparian buffer zones. It establishes 3 zones of varying widths when adjacent to a water body. A water body can be, of course, the bay, a river, or a FEMA-regulated floodway. And it is applicable to properties consisting of 2 acres or more adjacent to these water bodies. There are some exceptions to that within Article 3 for certain types of water-dependent uses, but in general, this is the applicable standard. The zones, again, measuring 1 through 3, and the limitation of uses within those zones to protect those natural resources. Another element that has been within the document since version 1, and we've received a lot of positive and supportive feedback on it, is the requirement for neighborhood meetings for rezonings, conditional uses, and other applications. The neighborhood meeting is a public forum that is intended to create a dialogue between the applicant and the neighborhood regarding the proposal. We've found when neighborhood meetings are held prior to and even after the submission of an application, it leads to a more successful application. A lot of the community's concerns are frequently addressed in these neighborhood meetings. And again, it just creates that dialogue and gives the community some information prior to receiving a notice from the city. And it also gives the applicant an opportunity to address concerns. As Shayla said in the beginning, all of this information is on the website, mapformobile.org. The public hearing, the first public hearing, will be with the Planning Commission on February 25th at 2 p.m. If you wish to submit comments or address the commission, you will have to register by Friday, February 19th at noon. That'll give staff an opportunity to provide all of the comments to the commission ahead of the meeting, as well as organizing the format for the public meeting. Shayla, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll add one thing. So again, the UDC, and I've not committed the page count to memory, but I believe, Margaret, we're at roughly.
Well, let me specify. There are less words in this document. However, due to formatting, there are more pages, but in terms of its formatting, it's a much easier layout. But more pages less words, easier to read.
In addition to that, when you go to the website, if you're interested in pulling this information down, we have a companion report that captures the feedback that we've received from draft 3 to draft 4. It tells you what comment was registered. It tells you who registered it, and it gives you the city's response. I've heard a few times for more than a handful of groups, well, I gave you my comment and you didn't do anything with it. So what we've tried to do is to first acknowledge that we did receive the comment if it was issued through the portal, but we've also tried to give a rationale as to why the city made the determination to move in one direction versus another based on that comment. And so that report is available for you to review. It's not intended to summarize the entire document, but I do think it gives, for those that are not code readers, a more digestible interpretation of what we've tried to accomplish, at least over the last year. So I encourage you to go to the website to review that document. Again, assuming that the governor's declaration will be in place for the end of February, it is our plan to host and facilitate virtual meeting. We've successfully done that over the last year with our required Planning Commission and Board of Adjustment meetings, but also have had virtual community town halls associated with the UDC, and have received pretty good turnout and participation. One thing that I think we all can be proud of, whatever your individual circumstances, that we've all figured out how to do things differently over the last year. And this process has been no different. So I encourage, if you're interested, to go onto the website to register by the 19th at noon. But if you just would like to monitor the process, we will also live stream our meetings on the city's YouTube page. So you have multiple ways to interface with us. So with that, I know that that was a lot of content and material to go over bright and early on a Thursday morning. But I think my hope, at least, is that we've given you a sense of directionally how the city has attempted to move with this process. You know, the mayor asked, over time, as you start to live with these codes, you realize that you may need to go deeper in one area versus another. What I think he's established is the long-term commitment to continually revisit our procedures, our codes from a long-range planning process. I think how we got to this point, unfortunately, with our zoning ordinance, is that the city had not, and it's requires a lot of resources, but had not taken a more comprehensive step to overhaul the entire ordinance. And so our commitment moving forward is to continue revisiting, figuring out where there may be kinks, providing good solutions to those, as we believe that this process only strengthens our internal procedures, but strengthens our community's development landscape. So with that, I, along with my team, are happy to answer any questions.
Shayla, thank you so much for all of that information. Speaking as a member of the city's planning commission, I just appreciate your team, Bert and Margaret and everybody else that works with the planning commission to provide us the information that we need to make the best decisions for the city of Mobile. And this has been just years and years in the making, starting with Map of Mobile and now with the UDC. And I just think that no matter what any individual might think about specific items in all of this, I think that we can all say thank you to the staff and the team that have been spending so much time working on this just to enhance our city and make it easier for people to build and develop with all of the protections in place. And so thank you. And thank you for being here to speak to PEP members about this. I'm going to open it to questions if anybody has anything that they would like to ask. Okay. I know it's early, and I did have a quick question. When you were talking about the peninsula overlay and the LID and the some of those requirements, was there any thought or any discussion about making that type of environmental requirements overall for any of the commercial or residential buildings? Or is that in there now, and I just haven't missed it? Or
Well, let me start here, and that's a really good question. You know, we're one of the most rainiest cities in the country, and on top of that, the amount of rainwater volume that we receive at any one time is not to be compared with any other city. And so one of the things that the engineering department is working on, and we believe it will be very helpful as we start to evaluate and revisit more LID practices, is that they are engaging in a stormwater mapping inventory and evaluation. And that process was grant funded. It's being funded through monies that we've received through our Restore allocation, and they are actively in the process of. As we began to sit around the table with our city engineers, they felt that the integration of these LID practices made sense and were appropriate for the peninsula based on its geography and based on some of the methodologies that the community was advocating. So at the moment, I would refer to them as a very first step. And I think that there is more that could possibly evolve out of that, and maybe those LID requirements could be expanded beyond just the peninsula. But for our engineering group, they wanted to be sure that before we started to require developers to utilize LID methodology that may not, in their opinion, sufficiently address the volume of rain that we received, that we be sure that we study and evaluate to see, to have a more concrete feel of where alternative drainage systems could be incorporated given the amount of rain that we receive. So when I talk about us revisiting, I think that's one of the things that we will look at first to and follow their guidance in terms of where those requirements could be employed in other areas.
And if I can weigh in, this is Bert Hoffman. What we have done that is applicable citywide is that we've reduced the amount of required parking for a lot of uses. So you can develop a site now and not provide as much paved parking with asphalt or concrete. Additionally, we're now going to allow the use of aggregate surface material for parking in excess of the minimum required. So it will provide at least some additional flexibility that will help address some stormwater and drainage issues. You're muted, Jennifer.
Thank you. So thank you for that information. That's very important information and good to know on both the study and on the parking requirements. Again, is there anybody that has a question or wants to make a comment? I'm sure Shayla and Bert or Margaret are available if you have something you want to discuss with them individually. I know that they are always willing to take the calls from the community and discuss the issues. So I just want to say thank you again, Bert, Margaret, Shayla, for being here and giving us this excellent presentation. Thank you to our PEP members for being here. And if there's nothing else, I will end the meeting and allow y'all to go on to your day. So thank you, and we'll see you in March for our next membership breakfast. Austell is our sponsor, and we will have a speaker from the USS Mobile Commissioning Committee. So it'll be very
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. Y'all have a good day.